My friends, let me ask you something. What if the fact that you cannot see your wish yet is not evidence that it is failing? What if the silence, the waiting, the uncertainty, and even the strange feeling that nothing is happening are not signs that you should give up, but signs that something is taking root where your eyes cannot reach? There are things in life that cannot grow in the light of constant observation. A seed does not become a tree because you keep digging it up to check whether it is growing. A new identity does not become real because you keep asking the old identity for proof. And a desire does not become yours by constantly looking at the outside world and demanding that it prove your imagination was correct. Some wishes only grow in the dark. They grow in the private place where nobody applauds you. They grow in the quiet moments when you choose a new assumption, even though your circumstances have not changed. They grow when you stop asking, "Where is it?" and begin living from the quiet understanding that what you have accepted inwardly is already becoming part of you. And by the end of this lecture, I want you to understand something that can completely change the way you experience waiting. You will see why the period when nothing appears to be happening may actually be one of the most important periods in your manifestation. You will understand why checking, doubting, comparing, and emotionally reacting to circumstances can interrupt the very process you are trying to allow. And more importantly, you will discover how to remain inwardly faithful to a new reality without forcing yourself to pretend that you do not see what is happening around you. Because this is not about escaping reality. It is about understanding where reality begins. Think about how many times you have wanted something deeply, imagined it clearly, felt something shift inside you, and then looked around your life and found absolutely no evidence of it. Perhaps you imagined financial freedom, but the same bills were sitting on the table. Perhaps you imagined love, but you were still alone. Perhaps you imagined success, but your circumstances still looked ordinary. Perhaps you imagined yourself becoming confident, peaceful, respected, secure, or fulfilled, and yet the outer world seemed almost determined to remind you of who you had been. And then comes the dangerous moment. You begin to wonder whether your imagination was simply wishful thinking. You begin checking. You check your bank account. You check your messages. You check the opportunities around you. You check what other people are doing. You check how long it has been. And without realizing it, you have moved from imagining the destination to studying the absence of the destination. That is a completely different state of consciousness. You are no longer living from the assumption of having. You are living from the awareness of not having. And the mind is incredibly sensitive to that difference. You may say, "I believe it is coming." But underneath those words may be another assumption saying, "It is not here yet." You may say, "I know things are changing," but emotionally, you may still be asking, "Why hasn't anything changed?" This is where many people become exhausted, not because imagination does not work for them, but because they keep returning to the old identity for confirmation. They plant a seed and then spend the entire afternoon staring at the soil. They tell themselves they trust the process. But every few hours they dig underneath the ground to see whether anything is happening. And then they wonder why they feel frustrated. The problem is not necessarily the desire. The problem is the relationship they have with the desire. They have made the arrival of the external thing responsible for their internal peace, and that places them in a state of waiting can look harmless. But psychologically, waiting often contains a powerful statement. It is not mine yet. I am still becoming. I will feel secure when. I will feel loved when. I will feel successful when. I will finally relax when the evidence appears. And this is exactly where the teaching associated with Neville Goddard becomes so interesting. The deeper principle is not simply that you should imagine something you want. It is that imagination is connected to identity. The question is not only, what do you want? The more important question is, who are you when you have it? That question changes everything, because two people can desire the same thing while occupying completely different inner worlds. One person desires wealth from the identity of someone who is always afraid of losing money. Another desires wealth from the identity of someone who feels capable, resourceful, calm, and secure. One person desires love while secretly believing they are difficult to love. Another desires love while naturally assuming they are worthy of being chosen. One person desires success while constantly watching for failure. Another desires success while gradually becoming comfortable, seeing themselves as someone who can succeed. The external desire may be identical. The inner position is not, and it is the inner position that matters. This is why the dark matters. The darkness is symbolic of the unseen. It is the private world before the evidence. It is the place where identity changes before circumstances reveal that change. Think about a seed beneath the soil. From above, nothing seems to be happening. The earth looks exactly the same. You could walk past it every day and conclude that nothing has changed. But underneath the surface, the seed is no longer what it was. Its old form is breaking apart. Roots are beginning to move downward. Something invisible is organizing itself before anything becomes visible. And if you judge the process only by what you could see, you would call that seed dead. You would be wrong. There is a stage in every transformation when the old evidence is still visible and the new evidence is not yet visible. That stage requires something people rarely talk about: inner patience, not passive waiting, not sitting around doing nothing. Inner patience means refusing to abandon a new identity simply because the outside world has not caught up with it yet. This is difficult because the human mind has been trained to trust evidence. We are taught to look first and then believe. If the bank account says you are struggling, you feel struggling. If someone rejects you, you feel rejected. If an opportunity disappears, you feel unsuccessful. If a relationship changes, you immediately redefine yourself through that change. But consciousness can work in the opposite direction. You can begin with an inner decision. You can decide what something means about you before circumstances tell you what it means. You can decide that rejection does not make you rejected. You can decide that delay does not mean denial. You can decide that temporary uncertainty does not define your future. You can decide that the person you are becoming is more important than the circumstances you are currently observing. And that is where your freedom begins. Because if your identity changes every time circumstances change, you will never experience stability. You will become a mirror. Whatever appears in front of you becomes who you think you are. Someone praises you and you feel valuable. Someone ignores you and you feel worthless. money arrives, and you feel secure. Money leaves, and you feel unsafe. An opportunity appears, and you feel powerful. An opportunity disappears, and you feel powerless. But imagine a mirror that could change its reflection depending on what stood in front of it. It would have no identity of its own. The conscious person learns to become more like the source of the reflection than the reflection itself. You stop saying, "This is who I am because this is what happened." You begin asking, "What happened? And who am I choosing to be in response?" That question gives you your power back. Now, this does not mean denying what is happening. If you have financial responsibilities, you still handle them. If there is a problem, you still address it. If you need to make a practical decision, you make it. The law of assumption is not an invitation to become careless with ordinary life. It is an invitation to stop allowing ordinary life to dictate your deepest concept of yourself. There is a difference. You can acknowledge a circumstance without worshiping it. You can see a problem without turning the problem into an identity. You can experience uncertainty without deciding that uncertainty is your permanent future. This is one of the most important distinctions you can make because emotions are not always predictions. Fear does not necessarily mean something bad is coming. Doubt does not necessarily mean your desire is impossible. Sadness does not mean you have failed. A difficult day does not cancel a new identity. Sometimes you are simply human, and the goal is not to control every emotion. The goal is to stop building your identity around every passing emotion. Think about weather. A storm can cover the sky for hours. If you stood outside during the storm and declared, "There is no sun anymore," you would be confusing temporary conditions with permanent reality. The sun did not disappear because clouds appeared. In the same way, a difficult emotional state does not erase the deeper direction you have chosen. You can feel fear and still return to security. You can feel lonely and still return to the assumption that you are loved. You can feel uncertain and still return to the identity of someone who knows how to move forward. The return is what matters, not perfection. Return, again and again. This is where the practice becomes subtle. You do not have to spend every waking moment visualizing. You do not need to force yourself into artificial excitement. You do not need to repeat affirmations until you are mentally exhausted. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply have a different inner conversation. Imagine that tonight, instead of lying in bed thinking about everything that has gone wrong, you quietly imagine yourself 6 months from now, not as a fantasy movie, just a moment. You are sitting somewhere familiar. Your breathing is relaxed. You think about the old version of yourself and you realize something. You survived the uncertainty. You made it through the period when you did not know how things would unfold. You remember the nights when you almost gave up, and now you smile because the person you are today would never have believed how naturally life could change. Stay with that feeling, not the excitement, the normality. That is important because when something becomes normal within you, you stop chasing it. A person who truly believes they belong somewhere does not spend every second convincing themselves they belong. A person who sees themselves as capable does not need constant evidence of capability. A person who feels worthy does not negotiate their worth every time someone disagrees with them. The new identity begins to feel ordinary, and that ordinariness is powerful. The desire becomes less, like something you are begging the universe to give you, and more like something that naturally fits the person you are becoming. This is why some wishes need darkness. They need privacy. They need room to become normal before they become visible. If you tell everyone about a fragile new belief, you may expose it to old reactions before it has become stable inside you. Someone may laugh. Someone may question you. Someone may remind you of your past. Someone may tell you to be realistic. And suddenly, you are defending a version of yourself that is still being born. Sometimes silence protects transformation. You do not need everyone to understand what you are becoming. A sculptor does not ask the stone for permission to reveal the figure inside it. The sculptor keeps removing what does not belong. In the same way, you begin removing old assumptions. I always struggle. Nothing works for me. People always leave. I am always behind. I never have enough. I am not the kind of person who succeeds. These are not merely sentences. Repeated long enough, they become coordinates. They tell your attention where to look. And attention shapes experience. If you believe people always reject you, your mind will become unusually sensitive to rejection. You will notice the unanswered message more than the kind message. You will remember the criticism more than the appreciation. You will interpret neutral behavior as distance. Your assumption becomes a filter. And then you say, see, I was right. This is one of the great psychological traps of identity. We often do not simply experience reality. We experience reality through the expectations we carry into it. Your assumptions become a kind of compass. A compass does not create the landscape, but it influences the direction in which you travel. Champ the direction, and eventually you encounter different territory. This is why changing your inner conversation matters. Suppose you make a mistake. The old identity says, there I go again. I always ruin things. The new identity might say, that did not go the way I wanted, but I am still someone who learns quickly and moves forward. Notice what happened. You did not deny the mistake. You denied the identity attached to it. That is a profound difference. Now suppose someone does not respond to your message. The old mind says, they do not care about me. Another inner position says, I do not know why they have not responded, and I am not going to create a painful story in the empty space. That is emotional maturity. You are learning not to fill uncertainty with the worst possible assumption. And this is practical manifestation because your inner world is not separate from how you behave. A person who expects rejection behaves differently from someone who expects connection. A person who expects failure approaches opportunities differently from someone who expects to figure things out. A person who believes they are powerless waits. A person who believes they have agency acts. Your assumption changes your posture toward life, and then life begins to meet a different version of you. This is why imagination is not merely about seeing pictures. It is about rehearsing identity. When you imagine yourself receiving something, do not obsess over the object. Imagine the version of you for whom the object is no longer extraordinary. If you desire financial stability, imagine yourself calmly handling money. If you desire love, imagine yourself being comfortable, receiving affection. If you desire success, imagine yourself handling responsibility without shrinking. If you desire peace, imagine yourself responding to problems without immediately becoming them. You are not only imagining what happens, you are imagining who you are when it happens. That is the deeper practice. And perhaps the most powerful time to practice it is at night. There is something beautiful about the period before sleep. The day has become quieter. The outside world begins to loosen its grip. You are no longer solving everything. You are simply existing. And in that quiet space, you can ask yourself one question. If everything I wanted were already settled, how would I feel right now? Do not force an answer. Maybe you would feel relief. Maybe you would feel safe. Maybe you would feel grateful. Maybe you would simply feel ordinary. Take that feeling and let yourself experience it for a few moments. Then imagine one small scene that would naturally happen if your desire were fulfilled. A conversation, a quiet morning, a message, a room, a handshake, a familiar voice, a simple sentence. The scene does not need to be dramatic. In fact, smaller is often better because your mind can inhabit it naturally. Let the scene become familiar, then sleep. Do not wake up the next morning and immediately demand evidence. That defeats the purpose. Let the seed remain underground. During the day, whenever the old story returns, do not fight it dramatically. Simply recognize it. There is the old assumption, and then return. Return to the identity you have chosen. If the thought says, nothing is happening, you can answer inwardly, I do not need to see everything while it is developing. If the thought says, what if it does not happen? You can answer, I am learning to live from certainty rather than constantly negotiating with fear. If the thought says, look at your circumstances, you can say, I see them. They are not the final definition of me. You do not need to win an argument with your mind. You only need to stop giving the old argument unlimited authority. There will be moments when you doubt. There will be mornings when you feel nothing. There will be days when your imagination seems distant. Do not turn that into another reason to attack yourself. Remember the river. A river does not become powerful because it shouts at the mountain. It simply continues moving, sometimes slowly, sometimes around obstacles, sometimes beneath bridges, sometimes through darkness. Your practice can be like that. Quiet, pisited, uncomplicated. You do not need to force the door open. You need to become the person who naturally walks through it when it opens. And sometimes the door does not open in the way you expected. This is where another layer of wisdom becomes necessary. Your imagination may give you a direction, but your human mind does not always know the entire path. You may imagine a particular outcome, while life begins rearranging things in ways you could never have predicted. A door closes. You think you failed. Weeks later, you discover that the closed door redirected you toward something better suited to who you were becoming. A relationship ends. You think your desire for love has been destroyed. Months later, you realize the ending forced you to develop a self-respect you had never possessed before. An opportunity disappears. You believe the universe ignored you. Then another opportunity appears that requires the exact confidence you developed during the disappointment. Sometimes the path looks like contradiction before it looks like fulfillment. That does not mean every painful event is secretly a blessing. Life is more complicated than that. It means you do not have enough information to decide what every event means while you are standing inside it. So be careful with conclusions. A shadow is not a wall. A delay is not a verdict. A chapter is not a biography. And darkness is not the absence of life. Sometimes darkness is where life is preparing itself. Think about a mountain. From a distance, the mountain looks still, but inside it, pressure is constantly moving. From the surface, nothing appears to happen. Yet entire landscapes are shaped by forces we cannot see. Your inner world can be like that. A small shift in self-concept may seem insignificant today, but if you repeat it long enough, your decisions change, your reactions change, your standards change, your relationships change, your habits change, your opportunities change because you begin noticing possibilities that the old identity could not recognize. And one day you look around and realize that your life did not change all at once. It changed quietly, one assumption at a time, one decision at a time, one inner conversation at a time, one refusal to return to the old identity at a time. That is why you should not underestimate small inner movements. A compass moves only slightly, yet that small difference can take you to an entirely different destination. The same is true of identity. If you wake up tomorrow and stop asking, why is my life like this? And begin asking, who am I choosing to be today? You have already changed the direction of your attention. And if you ask that question consistently, your life begins to organize itself around a different center, not magically in the childish sense, but deeply, psychologically, emotionally, behaviorally, spiritually. You become different. And because you become different, you experience differently. Because you experience differently, you act differently. Because you act differently, you create different consequences. And those consequences become visible. This is why you should stop measuring your transformation only through immediate external results. Measure it through who you are becoming. Are you less reactive? Are you less desperate for approval? Are you more comfortable with uncertainty? Are you speaking to yourself with more respect? Are you recovering faster when something goes wrong? Are you beginning to imagine possibilities instead of automatically imagining disasters? These changes matter. They are roots. Roots are not glamorous. Nobody takes pictures of roots. Nobody celebrates them. But without roots, there is no tree. So if you are in a season where your life looks quiet, do not automatically assume nothing is happening. Maybe your deepest work is happening below the surface. Maybe you are learning patience. Maybe you are releasing an identity that no longer fits. Maybe you are becoming comfortable with a version of yourself that once felt impossible. Maybe the old story is losing its emotional power. Maybe you are learning that you can experience uncertainty without collapsing into fear. These are not small things. These are foundations. And foundations are built before the building becomes visible. So tonight, give yourself permission to stop digging up the seed. You do not have to check every hour. You do not have to ask everyone whether they think your dream is realistic. You do not have to compare your timeline to someone else's. You do not have to punish yourself because the outside world has not yet reflected the inside world. Instead, return to the quiet place. Close your eyes. Take a breath. Remember what you have chosen. Then ask yourself, what would be natural for me if this were already becoming true? Maybe you would stop explaining yourself. Maybe you would sleep more peacefully. Maybe you would stop chasing a person. Maybe you would make a decision you have been afraid to make. Maybe you would finally begin acting like your future is worth preparing for. Do that, not because you are trying to manipulate reality, but because you are honoring the identity you have chosen. There is a profound difference between chasing a future and becoming ready for it. Chasing says, I need this to save me. Becoming says, I am preparing myself to receive and sustain what I desire. Chasing is anxious, becoming is grounded. Chasing constantly looks outward. Becoming continually returns inward. And perhaps this is the hidden gift of the dark. It teaches you to become without applause. It teaches you to believe without immediate evidence. It teaches you to remain yourself when circumstances are not cooperating. It teaches you that your peace cannot depend entirely on what the world is doing today. Eventually, you begin to understand something that feels almost paradoxical. The less you need your desire to prove that you are worthy, the more peacefully you can pursue it. You stop begging life to tell you who you are. You decide. You decide that you are capable. You decide that you are worthy of love. You decide that abundance is not something you must fear. You decide that you can recover. You decide that you can grow. You decide that your past does not have the authority to write every future chapter. And then you live from that decision. Not perfectly, but consistently enough for it to become familiar. That is how a new identity takes root. At first, it feels like imagination. Then it becomes a possibility. Then it becomes a preference. Then it becomes natural. And eventually, you look back and realize that the person who once desperately wanted this life would barely recognize the person who now lives it. The wish did not simply come true. You became someone for whom it could be true. And perhaps that is the deeper mystery behind every meaningful desire. May the desire is not only asking you to receive something. Maybe it is asking you to become someone. Maybe the dream you keep returning to is quietly revealing a version of yourself that wants to exist. The desire may be a door, but the person who walks through that door must be prepared. So do not despise the quiet season. Do not curse the invisible stage. Do not assume that because you cannot see roots, there are no roots. Some of the most important changes in your life will happen without witnesses. There will be no announcement, no dramatic sign, no voice from the sky. Just a quiet morning when you realize you are no longer reacting the way you used to. A conversation where you suddenly speak with confidence. A decision you once feared becomes obvious. A situation that once controlled your emotions no longer has the same power. And then, perhaps, something appears in the outer world that seems almost miraculous, but you will know better. You will know that the visible moment was not the beginning. It was simply the moment the invisible became visible. So if you are waiting right now, breathe. If you are uncertain, breathe. If the evidence seems absent, breathe. You do not have to force tomorrow into today. Let today be today, and let the person you are becoming grow quietly. Protect your inner garden. Be careful what you repeatedly tell yourself. Be careful what you rehearse before sleep. Be careful which version of yourself you keep returning to. Because every time you imagine, remember, assume, and emotionally rehearse a version of yourself, you are giving that version attention. And attention is one of the most powerful forms of nourishment you possess. Water the future, not the fear. Feed the identity you want to strengthen. Return to the assumption that gives you peace. And when the old world tries to pull you back into the old story, do not panic. A shadow can only exist because there is light somewhere. Keep walking. Keep returning. Keep becoming. One day, you may look back on this quiet period and realize that it was never empty. It was the garden. It was the soil. It was the darkness beneath the surface where your roots were becoming strong enough to carry the life you once only imagined. And perhaps then you will understand why some wishes take longer to appear. They were not merely waiting for the world to change. They were waiting for you to become familiar with the person who could live them. So tonight, when everything becomes quiet, do not ask, where is it? Ask something deeper. Who am I becoming? And then, gently, become that person. Because the seed does not need to see the tree to keep growing. The river does not need to see the ocean to keep moving. And you do not need to see the entire path to take the next step. Some things are not meant to be proven before they are lived. Some transformations require silence. Some dreams require patience. And some wishes only grow in the dark.